What would you think if the holiest object in a church, the one thing meant to hold grace, was shattered by the one man sworn to protect it? It started not with a bang, but with a quiet, arrogant slip of the hand. And what was uncovered in the wreckage of that sacred chalice was not just an ancient secret, but a truth that would bring a proud priest to his knees and an entire town back from the brink of despair. Father Alistair Blackwood was a man who loved God in the way a collector loves a rare butterfly. He pinned him down with theology, classified him with doctrine, and displayed him in the beautiful, dead language of liturgical precision. His faith was a fortress of intellect, meticulously built to keep the messy, unpredictable emotions of true belief at bay. He had been sent to the town of Havenwood as a form of quiet punishment, a demotion for a theological dispute with a bishop who favored passion over prose. Havenwood was a place forgotten by the highways, a town of peeling paint and quiet resignation. Its people held a simple, stubborn faith that Alistair found almost insulting. They prayed with their hearts, not their heads, and he considered it a spiritual deficiency. The church itself, St. Jude's, was a reflection of its town. It was old, worn, and smelled of damp stone and beeswax. Its parishioners were few, their faces etched with the gentle hardship of rural life. They were good people, but in Alistair's mind, they were simple, unworthy of his considerable talents. His greatest annoyance, the symbol of all this rustic backwardness, was the chalice. It was not the gilded, ornate vessel he was accustomed to. It was a plain, hammered silver cup, its stem worn smooth by the hands of priests long dead. The townspeople revered it. They called it the Chalice of the Wanderer. Legend said it had been carried to Havenwood by its founding priest and blessed by a traveling saint who had passed through centuries ago. To Alistair, it was just a piece of primitive metalwork, a relic of superstition that had no place in the modern, rational church he envisioned. Every Sunday, as he held it, he felt a small, sharp prick of contempt. He could feel its imperfections, the slight imbalance in its weight, the way the silver had grown dull with age. It felt like a peasant's cup, not a vessel for the divine. One particular Sunday morning, the air in the church was thick with the coming rain. The light filtering through the stained glass windows was gray and muted, casting weary shadows on the few faces in the pews. Among them was Alara, a girl of about 10 with eyes the color of a summer sky and a faith so pure it made Alistair uncomfortable. She served at the altar, her movements filled with a natural reverence he could only imitate. He was in the middle of the consecration, the most sacred moment of the Massachusetts. He lifted the old chalice, his mind not on the mystery he was enacting, but on a particularly elegant Latin phrase he planned to use in his sermon. It was a sermon on the intellectual fallacies of folk religion. A flicker of sarcastic amusement crossed his mind. Here he was, holding this crude cup, about to lecture these simple people on their simple beliefs. And in that moment of prideful distraction, his grip faltered. It was not a dramatic drop. It was a slow, almost lazy slip, a quiet betrayal by his own hand. The chalice tilted, slid from his fingers, and fell to the hard stone floor of the sanctuary. Time seemed to stop. The sound was not the dull clatter of metal he expected. It was a sharp, crystalline crack, a sound like ice breaking on a frozen river. It was the sound of something shattering. The congregation gasped as one. Alara's clear blue eyes widened in horror. Sister Agnes, the elderly nun who cared for the church linens as if they were the robes of angels, let out a small, wounded cry. Alistair stared down, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The chalice of the Wanderer, the town's most treasured artifact, lay in 3 large pieces in a spray of silver dust. It had broken like glass. But that was not the most shocking part. From the hollow base of the stem, a small, dark object had fallen and now lay stark against the white stone. It looked like a tiny, rolled scroll of parchment, tied with a single, brittle strand of what might have once been twine. Beside it lay something else, a dark, vicious-looking thorn, petrified and black with age. The silence in the church was absolute. It was a heavy, accusatory silence that pressed down on Alistair, heavier than any cathedral dome. He had not just broken a cup. He had broken a promise. He had shattered the heart of Havenwood. The immediate aftermath was a storm of quiet condemnation. Mr. Thompson, The head of the parish council and a man who measured faith by the numbers in the collection plate was apoplectic. He spoke not of sacrilege, but of historical value and insurance. His words were a barrage of practicality that felt more damning than any spiritual rebuke. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Father?" he had hissed in the sacristy, his face flushed with anger. That was the one thing, the one singular thing, that made this town special. Sister Agnes simply wept. She gathered the pieces of the chalice into a velvet cloth with the tenderness of a mother gathering a broken child. She did not look at Alistair, and her silent sorrow was a judgment far sharper than Mr. Thompson's fury. Alistair retreated into his pride. He told himself it was an accident. The chalice was old, its metal fatigued. It was bound to happen. The parchment and thorn were just trinkets, debris left by some sentimental priest centuries ago. He locked himself in the rectory, surrounded by his books, seeking refuge in the cold logic of their pages. But the town did not see it that way. To them, the broken chalice was an omen, a sign that their fragile peace had been violated. The church, which had been sparsely attended before, was now almost completely empty. His presence at the altar was a painful reminder of the desecration. He was a pariah in his own parish. Then, the sickness came. It started as a fever among the town's children, a strange and resilient illness that left doctors baffled. It moved swiftly, a silent thief in the night, stealing the energy and laughter from the young. And its first and most severe victim was Alara. The vibrant little girl who had served at his altar was now confined to her bed, her breath shallow, her skin pale as milk. Her sky-blue eyes were clouded with fever. The whispers started then, quiet at first, then growing into a grim chorus. It was the priest. It was his arrogance. He had broken the vessel of their protection, and now a plague was upon their children. The logic was medieval, superstitious, everything Alistair despised. And yet, he could not shake the cold knot of guilt tightening in his gut. He had isolated himself, but now he was truly alone. His books offered no solace. Their complex arguments about the nature of grace felt like hollow echoes in the face of a child's suffering. His faith, that great intellectual fortress, had become his prison. The walls he had built to keep out messy emotion now locked him in with his own suffocating shame. He was left with the wreckage. The broken pieces of the chalice on his desk, and the broken spirit of a town he was supposed to lead. The days that followed bled into a gray, monotonous twilight of the soul. Alistair's world shrank to the four walls of the rectory and the cavernous, empty church that seemed to mock him with its silence. The sickness in the town deepened, clinging to the children like a damp fog. Alara's condition had not improved. She hovered in a place between waking and sleeping, and the town doctor had run out of answers. Alistair's intellectual certainty began to fray at the edges. He tried to rationalize, to find comfort in cause and effect. A virus. A coincidence. But the explanation felt thin, a threadbare blanket against a rising storm of dread. He found himself staring at the artifacts from the chalice. He had placed the small parchment scroll and the petrified thorn on his desk. He had tried to dismiss them, but they held a strange power over him. They were tangible pieces of a history he had mocked, and now they seemed to be mocking him back. Subtle, unexplainable things began to happen. One evening, while poring over a dense theological text, he caught a scent in the air. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sweet, clean fragrance of roses. He searched the rectory, but there were no flowers. The scent was there, and then gone, a ghost of a memory. Another night, as he sat in the dark church, wrestling with his guilt, he heard a sound. It was not the creak of old wood or the sigh of the wind. It was a soft, sorrowful humming, a melody that seemed to come from the very stones of the building. It was a sound of immense grief, yet it held no anger. It was there, and then it was gone. His well-ordered mind rebelled. He was tired. He was under stress. These were hallucinations, tricks of a guilty conscience. But the experiences felt too real, too specific. They were cracks appearing in the fortress of his logic. Finally, unable to bear the silence of his study any longer, he picked up the small parchment scroll. His hands trembled slightly as he untied the brittle strand of twine. The parchment was fragile, almost translucent with age. He carefully unrolled it. The ink was faded, the script an elegant, looping hand from another time. It was a prayer, simple and direct. It was written by the town's founding priest. It dedicated the Chalice and the community of Havenwood to the protection of the Holy Mother, asking her to be a guardian for the town's children. It ended with a plea for a sign of her loving presence, a thorn to show her sorrow for our sins, and a rose to show her promise of grace. A thorn. Alistair looked at the black, petrified object on his desk. His breath caught in his throat. This was not debris. This was intention. This was faith made tangible. The weight of it all finally broke him. The sickness, the empty church, the town's silent accusation, the suffering of an innocent child. His pride, his intellectualism, his carefully constructed theology, it was all just dust. It offered no cure, no comfort, no hope. He fell to his knees on the cold, hard floor of his office. He was at his absolute lowest point, a man stripped of all his defenses, left with nothing but his own profound failure. For the first time since he was a small boy, Alistair Blackwood prayed. It was not a prayer of elegant words or structured thought. It was a raw, guttural cry from the depths of his being. A torrent of shame, regret, and utter desperation poured out of him. He stumbled from the rectory into the dark, moonless church. He knelt before the main altar, the place where he had committed his act of arrogant carelessness. He could see the faint outline of the crack in the stone where the chalice had fallen. "Please," he whispered into the crushing silence, his voice cracking. The word was a surrender. "Not for me. I deserve nothing. But please, don't let these children suffer. Don't let Alara suffer." He bowed his head, resting his forehead on the cold stone, and wept. He wept for the girl, for the town, for the hollowness of his own heart. He let go of everything, his pride, his knowledge, his certainty. He was empty. And in that emptiness, something shifted. The cold of the stone floor seemed to recede, replaced by a strange and gentle warmth. The scent of roses returned, no longer faint, but rich and overwhelming, as if 1,000 blossoms had just opened in the darkness around him. He did not fall asleep. He simply drifted. The hard edges of the church dissolved. The darkness softened into a deep, twilight blue. He was no longer kneeling on stone, but on soft, cool grass. He looked up and found himself in a simple, walled garden. A single olive tree stood in the center, its leaves shimmering with a light that had no source. A woman was standing beside the tree. He could not see her face clearly. It was veiled in a gentle sorrow that seemed to emanate from her like a soft light. She wore a simple blue cloak, the color of the sky just before dawn. She was not a queen or an apparition of fire, but a mother, cloaked in a grief so profound it was almost silent. He felt no fear, only a sense of profound awe and an equally profound shame. He knew who she was. She did not speak at first. She simply looked at him, and in her gaze he felt all of his pride, his sarcasm, and his intellectual vanity stripped away, not by judgment, but by a sorrowful love that broke his heart all over again. She gestured towards his hands. Alistair looked down and was startled to see that he was holding the broken pieces of the chalice. They felt heavy, their jagged edges sharp against his skin. The woman moved towards him, her steps making no sound on the grass. She reached out and placed her hand over his, her touch not physical, but like a wave of pure warmth and peace. The sharp edges of the broken silver no longer felt like they could cut him. Then she spoke. Her voice was not a sound in the air, but a thought that blossomed directly in his mind, gentle and clear. "What is broken can be mended," she said, her voice filled with an infinite compassion. "My son waits for you." The scent of roses was overpowering, a wave of pure grace. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the garden was gone. He was on the cold stone floor of St. Jude's. The first pale fingers of dawn were reaching through the stained glass windows, painting the sanctuary in hues of rose and gold. He was drenched in sweat, his body aching, but the crushing weight in his soul was gone. It had been lifted. He felt clean. He felt new. He looked at his hands, expecting to see the broken pieces of the chalice, but they were empty. He was filled not with knowledge, but with a quiet, certain peace. The fortress had fallen, and in its ruins, something true had finally begun to grow. The first act of the new man was one of humility. Alistair rose from the floor, his knees stiff, and went directly to his office. He gathered the 3 silver pieces and the velvet cloth. He did not try to hide them. He did not consider what Mr. Thompson or the bishop would say. He had a different purpose now. He walked through the sleeping town as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows down the empty streets. He did not go to a jeweler or an artisan. He went to the forge at the edge of town, a soot-stained building run by an old man named Chalice, the town blacksmith. Chalice was a known skeptic, a man who believed in the strength of steel and the heat of the fire, not in unseen things. He was hammering a piece of iron when Alistair entered, the rhythmic clang filling the dusty air. He stopped and looked at the priest with wary, suspicious eyes. Alistair did not offer a theological argument or a patronizing explanation. He simply unwrapped the velvet cloth and laid the broken pieces of the chalice on the workbench. "I broke this," Alistair said, his voice quiet and steady. "I broke it with my pride, and I need your help to mend it." Chalice grunted, picking up a piece. "Can't be fixed. Not to look like it was. The seams will always show." "I don't want the seams to be hidden," Alistair replied, a new clarity in his voice. "I want them to be seen. I've read of an old art, of mending what is broken with gold, to show that it is more beautiful for having been fractured." The blacksmith stared at him, his gaze softening from suspicion to curiosity. He saw not a haughty priest, but a broken man seeking to mend something more than just a cup. "That will take time," Chalice said, his voice gruff but no longer hostile. "And gold. We will find it," Alistair said, "and we will take the time." As they began to work, a strange thing happened. Word spread through Havenwood. The priest was at the forge. He was trying to repair the chalice. People began to emerge from their homes, drawn by a tentative curiosity that began to blossom into a fragile hope. They gathered at the open doors of the forge, a small crowd at first, then more. They watched in silence as Alistair, his fine clerical clothes smudged with soot, worked alongside the blacksmith. He held the pieces steady while Chalice carefully planned the repair. Someone asked what he was doing. Alistair stopped his work, turned to the small crowd, and told them everything. He spoke of his arrogance, his foolish pride, and the vision in the church. He spoke not as a priest from a pulpit, but as a man confessing his own profound sickness. He then unrolled the small parchment and read the founding priest's simple prayer aloud. He finished, and a deep silence fell over the gathered townspeople. It was not the accusatory silence of before, but a shared, contemplative quiet. And into that quiet, a new sound broke. It started as a single, clear note, then another and another. It was the sound of the church bells. They rang out across the town, loud and joyous. Everyone knew the rope to the bells had been broken for days. Yet, they rang. A moment later, a boy came running down the street, his face alight with breathless joy. "It's Alara," he shouted. "She's awake. She sat up, and her fever is gone." She asked for a glass of water. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Eyes turned from the boy to the priest, then to the sky, as if seeking a source for the impossible. Mr. Thompson, who had been standing at the back, his arms crossed in skepticism, slowly lowered them. Sister Agnes, who had been praying silently, looked up, tears of gratitude streaming down her wrinkled face. The healing had begun, not just in a little girl's room, but in the heart of the entire town. The chalice was reborn. Over the next week, the people of Havenwood brought what they had. An old woman offered her gold wedding band. A farmer brought a small gold coin his grandfather had given him. Mr. Thompson, his face humbled, gave a gold cufflink. Chalice melted them all down, and, with painstaking care, he and Alistair filled the cracks of the broken chalice. It was not the same vessel. It was more. It was a map of its own brokenness, a testament to its redemption. The veins of gold ran through it like rivers of light, more beautiful than the original, unblemished silver ever could have been. The following Sunday, St. Jude's was full. People stood in the aisles and crowded at the back. There was no coughing, no shuffling of feet. There was only a profound, reverent silence. On the altar, restored and radiant, stood the chalice of the wanderer. Its flaws, now its greatest glory, caught the morning light and shone. Alistair stood before them, not as a scholar, but as a shepherd. He did not deliver a prepared sermon. He simply held up the mended chalice and shared his story, his voice thick with a humility that was more powerful than any oratory. He spoke of how grace had found him not in his strength, but in his absolute brokenness. The town was changed. The illness vanished from the other children as quickly as it had come. Neighbors began to speak to one another again, not with suspicion, but with a shared sense of wonder. Small acts of kindness rippled through the community. The cycle of grace, once shattered, now flowed freely. Father Alistair Blackwood remained in Havenwood for the rest of his days. He never again delivered a sermon on theological complexities. Instead, he shared the simple story of a broken cup and a love that was strong enough to mend both it and the man who had broken it. He became a conduit for the quiet peace that had settled over the town, a living reminder that only by admitting we are broken can we ever truly be made whole. The story of Father Alistair and the shattered chalice reminds us that our most profound moments of grace often come not from our perfection, but from our brokenness. It is in acknowledging our cracks, our failures, and our pride that we create space for something divine to enter and make us more beautiful than before. The journey from shame to grace is one we all walk, and it is paved with humility and hope. If this story of redemption and healing touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales of faith and transformation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found strength in a moment of weakness? And please, share this message with someone who might need to hear that being broken is not the end, but the beginning of being made new.